Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And first off, just want to start off by thanking everyone for their patience while we were out of town for a few days, but hopefully we'll be back to our normal routine of episodes more days than not in this series. And hopefully, going forward, this team will be more successful than it has been through the first 5 years of this playthrough. At the end of the last episode, we completed the Rule 5 draft. We did not do very much in the draft this year, but you can see we lost a lot of 4A players off of our team. Not guys that we were going to protect on our 40-man roster, but players who had helped our AA and AAA teams over the last couple of seasons. Likely, I'm guessing we'll be getting many of that back in the coming months as they don't end up making the 26-man rosters on their new teams. Appreciate all of the thoughts in response to our last episode about what we should potentially do in international amateur free agency, which is about 3.5 weeks away at this point. We'll kind of go through those thoughts and ideas from our loyal viewers in more depth when we do get to that point. Right now, we haven't done a ton this offseason, but we're actually in a pretty good financial situation. Still have over $18 million to spend, and that's with a strong potential scouting and player development budget next year, as well as enough in the draft to cover the fact that we have the third overall pick by virtue of having got a bit lucky in the draft lottery a week or two ago. But we're not going to spend all that money immediately. There are several interesting players out there, position-wise. Alkis brought up Jack Sawinski. Others have brought him up in response to previous episodes, and I do think he could be a very interesting player for us to bring on board in center field. Like the glove, like the speed, really like the bat with good home run power and an excellent ability to draw walks, coming off of a few relatively rough seasons. And over the course of his major league career, he's been just a little bit above average in terms of his offensive play. But against right-handed pitching, he has been a borderline dynamic offensive player despite that pretty miserable 219 average. If his price comes down, would certainly consider bringing him on board. But right now, he is still looking for 6 years at $15 million a year for a guy who's going to be turning 31 around the All-Star break of this upcoming season. I think that's still a bit too much of a commitment for Oakland to make. But we're certainly going to keep our eye on him. Going to keep our eye on Joe Adell, who some of you have mentioned as well. Could reunite with O'Neal Cruz. Could potentially finally sign Eloy Jimenez after looking at him for many seasons. The international free agents, Hideki Arakawa and Juan Mendoza, certainly on the list of guys we're going to continue monitoring. And then Riley Green, another guy who we would need his price to come down significantly, but could certainly be an impact player for us in center field. Similarly, there are a fair amount of really high-end pitchers that are available, both relievers and starters, but waiting for the potential prices on all of them to come down to. I think we could still, over the next 2 to 3 months, add a couple of pretty interesting players through free agency. But with the number of solid players that are still on the market, we're going to try to do it on our terms. We've also been doing some player searches for guys who are in the final year of their contract who we might be able to rent for a full season. We've also been checking out the trade block. Nothing imminent on either of those fronts. We're getting some updated scouting reports on some players. But I think between the combination of free agency, players on the trade block, and players who aren't on the trade block that we still try to pursue anyways, we can probably add another couple potentially useful players into the mix over the next 2 to 3 months of this offseason. And we're also kind of keeping an eye on some players who are more popular. We did make pretty solid progress this offseason in terms of our fan interest when we made the important trade for Colt Keith, but would certainly love to boost fan interest a bit more before the season gets underway. So, depending on what we're able to do at the mid to high end of the free agent and trade markets, that may determine how active we are just adding a guy who can potentially give us a boost to fan interest as well. If we see our free agent opportunities dry up a bit before we're willing to spend the money, obviously it's more likely that we'll just end up signing someone to get a boost to fan interest, even if it ends up being temporary. So given that I think there are a lot of potential options for us over the next few months to add another pitcher or two and perhaps another position player or two onto our eventual 26-man roster, probably not going to be doing too much over the next few weeks. I think it's mainly going to be preparing for international amateur free agency and then hopefully leveraging all the thoughts from our worldwide scouting department to make the right decisions there. And we've signed a few minor league players, including the international free agent Hideki Arakawa. You may remember we did make him an offer of a minor league contract with $1 million major league option. He's got the opportunity to opt for free agency if he's not promoted by the end of April, early May. But this will give us a free look at him in camp, and it will also give us the opportunity to potentially be a little more creative with trade offers. Max Muncy is a guy who right now is looking like a utility infielder for us, but Muncy, although we've never really given him much of a fair shot, and I don't think he's an incredible player in this version of the world that we're living in, still is a guy that teams have expressed some interest in from time to time. So having Arakawa in the organization may allow us to be a little more loose in terms of potentially using Muncy in a trade if it will help us add some talent over the next couple of months. And Colby Allard, who is a guy that we were thinking about potentially bringing back if the price came down, has now signed with the Yankees for almost $4 million a year. The fans not pleased about it, even though he was purely a rental for us, who was a .500 pitcher with an ERA of close to 5. The fans still not pleased that Mr. Allard has gone to the Yankees, which ultimately cost us a point in terms of fan interest. And some more options coming off the market for us, unfortunately, as we get to January 1st, 2029. Clark Schmidt was signed by the White Sox. The fans not pleased with that. And Jack Sawinski signed with the New York Yankees, 6 years at $13.6 million a year, so a little less than he was asking for. I'm sure we could have gotten him for a similar number, but I still think that an $82 million commitment to a guy who's already on the wrong side of 30 is probably a bit more than we could afford to do with this Oakland A's team. Certainly limits our options a bit, but there are still plenty of fish in the sea. One fish who is not in the sea anymore that I wanted to mention because has been mentioned in comments and replies to previous episodes, but another guy who is no longer on the market for us, unfortunately, is the excellent starting pitcher Hunter Green. He also signed with the Yankees, 7 years, almost $150 million. Certainly would have liked to add a pitcher with Green's stuff and his velocity and that incredible fastball and slider into the mix. But 21 million-ish a year for another guy who's headed into his mid-30s by the end of the contract is probably a bit aggressive for this Oakland team at this point in our development of the franchise. And as we get ready for the beginning of the international amateur free agent signing period, we have made one deal. It's one that we've been kind of looking on in the periphery. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks ago, we could have gotten much better terms on it. And by waiting around, the deal is not as good for us. But with starting pitchers starting to come off the market, and the starting pitchers who remain on the free agent market still looking for crazy money, we wanted to give ourselves a little more optionality at the position. So we have traded for the 29-year-old pitcher Mason Black from the San Francisco Giants organization. Looks like he can be average-ish or above at just about anything. Only a 3-pitch arsenal, pretty good stamina, ground ball tendencies, throws in the mid to high 90s, and he only has a little over 3 years of major league experience, so he's making about $1.9 million this year. We got San Francisco to keep a small amount of that. Still arbitration eligible for another few seasons, so we've got control of him if we want him. But certainly think at the back end of our rotation, he could be a respectable starter for us, although over the course of his major league career, he has not been particularly good with a 81 ERA plus and a 110 FIP minus. That said, his SIERA of 3.99 is significantly better than the ERA that he's put up. Our hope is that with our really good infield defense, especially up the middle, he may be more effective in Oakland than he has been on the other side of the bay. We had to give up, as I said, more than I like to bring him on board. Had to give up Casey Mize, who we had in our minor league system last year. That doesn't bother me at all. With his 45 stuff and his fragility, he was really just organizational depth for us. But we did have to give up the center fielder Greg Austin, who was our 4th-round draft pick not all that long ago. 4th-round pick of ours in 2027, so just a year and a half ago. He didn't have a particularly successful major league or professional debut, hitting a $179 in rookie ball as a 19-year-old primarily. But he did have 10 homers last year. Certainly looks like he could be a pretty interesting power hitter at the major league level, but we are stronger with bats in our organization in the minors right now. And as I said, I felt like we could use certainly at least one more major league arm, and we wanted to take advantage of bringing Black on board. We were going to have to give up Austin in the original trade that I was working on for him, but a couple of weeks ago we could have sent them only Austin and got them to keep about 60% of Black's contract for next year. So had to add in Mize, and they're retaining less of his contract, so didn't work out perfectly for us. But although 5 years from now, I'm guessing Austin will be a much more useful major league player than Mr. Black. I think Black does give us, as I said, another solid professional major league starter, which in combination with our good defense and hopefully better offense this year will help push this Oakland team to more success on the field in 2029 than we've previously had in this playthrough at the major league level. And Black is not looking for crazy money for us to buy out his arbitration-eligible years, plus the first 2 to 3 years of free agency. Said he was looking for $14 million over 5 years. We're going to offer him somewhat less, $12.2 million over 5 years with some team options at the end. I don't think he'll quite go for this, but if he does would not be a bad contract for us, because actually his numbers these next 2 years after this upcoming season in 2030 and 2031 are less than he's expected to make in arbitration at this point. Not exactly what he's looking for, unfortunately, so we'll have to up it a little bit if we want to get a deal with him done. I don't think it's pivotal that we do this, so we're actually going to move on for the time being and dig into international amateur free agency, where many of you have shared very helpful thoughts for us over the last couple of days on what we should potentially do. And I think, although there were some pretty strong opinions, and there definitely is a landslide in terms of the voting, if it were actual voting, in terms of who you all think that I should go with. Several commenters also made the comment that it seemed to be somewhere where if we're picking among the 3 or 4 top players, we can't really go wrong. There definitely, as I said, was one player who was significantly more popular than all the rest, but even some of those who had a strong opinion on that player kind of felt like there were some other pretty interesting options available as well. And one positive thing that we have done over these last 3+ weeks since the start of the episode is in terms of bringing players into our final scouting camp, and then also continuing to doing some scouting. We've got very high scouting accuracy now on all 10 of the players that were most recently in our camp, and we also have as much money to spend as anybody. 2 pitchers that we talked about in the last episode. Luis Espinal is likely a reliever, given the amount of money he's looking for, $2.6 million, probably not the direction that we'll go. Edgar Ailman, someone who Josh Davis liked, and if we're going to go with a pitcher, it will certainly be Ailman. 3 pitches only, but they're not far off major league quality at this point. He's durable, got enough stamina to start, and could potentially have outstanding stuff with average movement and above average control. Like the lefty, looking for $3 million. If we go with a pitcher, it's going to be Ailman, but I'm pretty intrigued by some of the hitters who are available in the IAFA pool this year. And as I mentioned, we have progressed to have a very high scouting accuracy on all 8 of the players that we had in camp most recently, although we certainly needed supplemental scouting reports to get there on some of them. There were 3 players among those 8 that none of the viewers actually highlighted as their top choices. I'll cover them first. You can see it's kind of interesting. It's a pretty consistent amount that all of these guys are looking for. The lowest is 2.4 and the most is 3.2, so they're all kind of in that mid-2 to low 3s range. The 3 least popular were the shortstop Daniel Ocasio, solid defender, and a certainly interesting bat. Not a ton of speed, but he doesn't stand out to me either compared to some of these other potential players for us to pursue. Another one who was not as popular with the viewers is the 3rd baseman Jorge Gul. Very good potential contact and power, but again, we're going to be seeing that theme with many of these other players. Not as much speed, not as competent defensively, although there are some positive personality traits there. And last, but probably not least, was the shortstop Luis Mendoza. Some pretty positive personality traits, not great defensively, pretty average speed. Do think he's an interesting player with potentially outstanding home run power and an outstanding eye. I'm a little more interested in Cutter Mendoza, but tend to think that some of these other players are probably a bit more interesting prospects, which is what our viewers thought as well. And 3 of the 5 remaining players actually got relatively tepid support. Jorge Mendoza is a guy who was noted by Jeansy as a potentially interesting prospect, a very interesting bat for a catcher, left-handed hitting catcher, which is always interesting for a potential platoon. Has some positive personality traits, and Jeansy brought up the point we could likely get Avenger Mendoza into the development lab pretty regularly on a defensive program and hopefully get him to be better defensively, in which case the 17-year-old out of Panama could become a pretty interesting prospect. So he is certainly someone that we're still thinking about and considering, even though he wasn't among the most favored by our worldwide scouting department. 2 other players who had a little more support than Mendoza, but still not robust support, were the center fielder Juan Mascarenas, who Stanley Rosella and DLL first base 14 both identified. A very well-balanced profile with Mascarenas. The thing that I probably like about him the most is if he fully develops, he's kind of good at everything. Plus contact, plus power, plus gap power, plus eye, above average speed, good range in the outfield. He's a smart player. I don't think his ceiling is necessarily as high as maybe some of the other players if they reach their full potential. But if he does reach his full potential, Juan Mascarenas is, to me, a pretty valuable player. But he is also looking for more than anybody else, which may end up working against him as I try to get to this final decision. And another center fielder, Luis Anaya, was also identified as someone to consider by 2 of our scouts, Josh Davis and Mark Jaquette, in this place. Paquito Anaya, like the high work ethic, guy who could play first base or corner outfield competently, has above average speed, and excellent contact hitter with really good gap power, plus power, and an average eye as well. Do think with this profile, with that excellent contact, really good gap power, and plus speed, that playing half of his games in the Oakland Coliseum, this line drive spray hitter could come up with some pretty significant numbers of doubles and triples, while also being a respectable home run hitter and drawing a fair amount of walks. So Anaya is popular as well with me, as well as some viewers, as I noted. But the final 2 guys that we were going to talk about are clearly the 2 most popular with the viewers who graciously took the time to share your thoughts on what you would do in this draft with me over the last few days. And the second most popular player with our scouts was the left fielder Fidel Flores. Not hard to see why. A lot of positive personality traits. Bit below average in terms of his speed. Certainly not a great defensive outfielder. But he is a guy who potentially has excellent contact, excellent home run power, and above average gap power and eye. So certainly could be a pretty devastating offensive force if he fully develops. Not my 4-ply, DLL first base 14, Alkshi, Expedient Falcon, Leo Volpain, all mentioned Trucker Flores, the switch hitting outfielder, as someone to consider. And the nice thing about Flores is with that $2.4 million amount that he's looking for, he's as reasonable as anybody else. There is certainly a part of me right now with $5.7 million to spend. You look at Flores at $2.4 million and Jorge Mendoza at $2.4 million. There is some chance that if we rolled the dice on both of those players with initial offers, let's just say splitting the $5.7 million evenly, $2.85 million each, I don't think it's a likely scenario that we get them both for that price, but it's not impossible. And coming out of the IAFA period with a couple of 5-star prospects would be incredibly intriguing to me. But as intriguing as that option is, it's not the preferred choice of our worldwide scouting department. And it's certainly not unanimous, as we've talked about a lot of other players who could be very interesting. But the right fielder out of Cuba, Sergio Palomares, is the overwhelming favorite. Number of viewers said that Palomares was either the guy or one of the top guys that they would consider. Don't worry, I don't know where you live. Max Taylor, Jake Poston, John Hunter, Dodo Dude, Not My Four-Ply, Righteous One, Josh Davis, Bald Sherlock, the notorious KEV, Marilee Murphy, Stanley Rosella, DLL First Base 14, Alkshi, John Maloney, and Expedient Falcon all said that Gravedigger Palomares was the direction that they would go. And it's not hard to understand why, looking at his profile. Potentially world-class eye in terms of drawing walks, to go with outstanding contact and outstanding gap power potential. Couple that with the excellent speed, and he is potentially an on-base percentage machine, slamming doubles and triples all over. The home run power is clearly the biggest hole in his game. As a right-handed hitter who'd be playing half of his games in Oakland if he does make it to the majors, our park is really going to nerf that power that anyone has in terms of home run power as a right-handed hitter anyways. So it would be an extremely rare occurrence for him to hit a home run at home. But outside of the lack of power, everything with him is pretty positive. I mentioned the blazing speed, not an incredibly effective base stealer or base runner given that great speed, but still should be pretty productive. Really good outfield range. He's going to make some errors, but honestly, if I had to choose between someone in the outfield with a 60 range and a 40 error, or a 40 range and a 60 error, I'm going to go with the 60 range every time, because if you can't get to the ball, you're definitely not going to be able to make a play on it. Does have the high work ethic that we like to see in our prospects, high adaptability as well. So I think he's a guy that we could certainly work with throughout the minor leagues and potentially in the development lab to ensure that we maximize his development. I guess in addition to the lack of power, the fact that he's not the greatest leader is not positive, but certainly tons of very positive things to say about Gravedigger Palomares. He's looking for $3 million, so higher demand than some of these other players. And interestingly, our relationship with him is only strong, whereas we have a very strong relationship with most of the guys who have been coming through our camp over these last few months. And while I like a lot of these players, there are kind of just two options that I'm thinking about here as we start off the IAFA period. One would certainly be to go with the player that our scouts most highly recommend, and the player who I think I agree with is probably the most interesting prospect in the pool of international amateur free agents to me, and that is Sergio Palomares, the Gravedigger. The other option, though, would be to roll the dice and try to go for an absolutely monster IAFA period by pairing the two cheapest guys that we like, overbidding from the start on both of them, and potentially bringing on the catcher Jorge Mendoza, who could have an outstanding bat for a catcher and could potentially improve his defense over the next few years. and also bring on Fidel Flores, who was the number 2 choice of our scouts. Another guy who's not necessarily great defensively, doesn't have a ton of speed, but a very impressive potential bat, is a switch hitter. And with both Flores and Mendoza, we have very strong relationships with each of those guys. Bringing them both on board at $2.85 million each, which is, again, splitting the 5.7 we have would be an incredible result. But I think that's only an incredible result if we get both of them at $2.85 million. And I don't think that those overbids are enough to assure us that we lock them both up. And it's conceivable that we only end up with one of them, and then we don't really have enough money left for another one of the top players. So as much as I think if that works out in a perfect scenario, let's say maybe a 10 to 20% chance that we do lock them both up at $2.85 million, I think the chance that we end up with only one of those guys is the most likely scenario if we do that. And if we're only going to end up with one guy in this IAFA period, I do think I agree with our worldwide scouting department, and I want it to be Gravedigger Palomares. So we are still going to be aggressive with Mr. Palomares from the start, especially given that there is very high league interest in him, and our relationship with him is not quite as strong as it is with some others. Says he will settle for $3 million, but we're going to offer him $3.75 million right at the start. Try to lock him up over the next week or so, if at all possible, and then that would still leave us with nearly $2 million to potentially go after some of the mid-tier prospects here in the 2029 IAFA period. So $3.7 million offer is out to Sergio Palomares, and we'll find out what happens. And the initial feedback from Sergio is positive. Says it's a fair offer, and unless someone else offers me a better deal, he'll sign with us, given that he is a very popular 5-star prospect, and he's the most popular player in the pool, according to our scouts. I'm guessing that there's probably going to be many other teams and many other scouts who have a similar view of Mr. Palomares, so certainly don't think we have him locked up by any stretch of the imagination. And we went aggressive. We went in hard with the guy that we wanted from the start. And Sergio Palomares has joined the Oakland A's organization. As I mentioned, that leaves us with $1.95 million left to spend. So we are not going to have the truly monster IAFA period that was possible if we tried to go after a couple of 5-star guys. As I said, I think the Mendoza-Flores scenario was the most realistic way to try to do that. But we have got the player that we liked the best in the entire pool signed, and we didn't have to use anywhere near our full $5.7 million to sign him. So as I noted, $1.95 million left for our Oakland A's to play around with as we try to find a few other players to hopefully bolster our international complex and ultimately our farm system. So it's been just under a month that we covered in this episode, and did come out of it with the player that we, and just as importantly, our viewers like the most in the IAFA pool. Also did make that trade to bring the pitcher Mason Black on board. Feel pretty good about our 5 starters at this point, but it's certainly an area that we still could look to improve. As we sit here on January 20th, the free agent pool is getting a little bit thinner. and prices haven't really started coming down all that much yet, but there are still guys we could certainly go after. Chris Bryant, if we just want to be cynical and just go for the popularity boost, could still be a useful bat against left-handed pitchers for us. Joe Adell is another guy who's been mentioned previously by multiple viewers. Do also feel, looking at his ratings, that he could be a pretty interesting bat against left-handed pitchers for us. A little more reticent on Adell at this point, though. Doesn't have the same type of popularity as Bryant. Looking for a lot more money than Bryant. And when we look at what Adell has done in his career, he's pretty consistently been a below-average offensive player for the last half decade at this point. And even when we look at his splits, an 88 WRC plus overall, he's 88 against left-handed pitching, and he's 87 against right-handed pitching. So although his splits do make it look like he would be more effective against left-handed pitching with 10 points more gap power, 5 points more power, 5-point better eye at this point in his career, I almost think if I was going to go for just a one-dimensional guy to play primarily against left-handed pitching, I'd probably bring Bryant on board for the boost in fan interest and the fact that he's looking for about 30% of what Mr. Adell is looking for. Hope that only playing Bryant against left-handed pitching, we'd be able to overcome the fact that he is wrecked physically. Certainly there's other guys who are still in the mix, though. Eloy Jimenez, Tyler Stevenson, a reunion with O'Neal Cruz, Matt Chapman could work out, even Will Benson. There's definitely still options as far as the position players who are available, and we still have plenty of money to spend at this point. Starting pitching wise, the top guys have really come off the market at this point. Luis Castillo, Jacob deGrom, and Logan Webb are the top three guys who are left as far as starting pitchers, but they all have their issues. deGrom's is that he's going to miss the entire season, so that is certainly not someone we're going to be looking to spend almost $14 million on. Webb is also wrecked physically and has below-average stuff at this point. And Luis Castillo in his mid-30s and also his below-average stuff. All three of these guys are barely getting into the 90s in terms of their velocity, so I think that the trade we did for Mason Black may end up being the most significant acquisition we do of a starter going forward, with Jackson Ferris and now Mason Black added this offseason. Do feel like we've replenished our starting pitching decently, although neither is necessarily a true ace. Hopefully we will be able to add some depth as far as our bullpen, though. The numbers that some of these guys are looking for are still pretty high, but Andrew Nardi is a left-hander out of the pen, could be a really nice addition. Eli Morgan, wouldn't mind him either. Justin Lawrence. The stuff for Tyler Rogers and Clay Holmes is a little bit of a concern for me. Ian Hamilton might be someone to consider, but would hope that the prices come down a bit for at least one or two of these guys. So I think we've got some options. We're also going to continue pursuing and perusing the trade market. So it's probably going to be another situation where we may move forward a couple of days between now and our next episode, just as I'm scouting people like crazy, shopping people on our team like crazy, using up all my shopping opportunities for a day and just trying to figure if there's any interesting trades out there. As I talked about, we've got the money to take on a contract for next season. I just don't know if we're going to have the resources to pick up a true impact player in that kind of trade. The trade block, though, still is got some interesting guys on it. Pitching wise, Edwin Diaz, Bo Breesky, and Walker Powell are the three most highly regarded. You can see our minor leaguer Cruz Schoolcraft is also on the trading block, but we have not been getting a huge amount of interest generated in Mr. Schoolcraft, unfortunately. Edwin Diaz would certainly be a huge asset for our bullpen for a year, but $24 million or 35 plus percent of the Oakland payroll is probably not what we want to spend on a closer, as good as he is. Batting wise, the Rangers, both Wyatt Langford and Evan Carter are on the IL. They're both making pretty big money. Would be tough for us to bring on board. Jake Berger, the first baseman, if we decide against a Bryant or against a Joe Adele, Berger could be an interesting guy to try to trade for, making pretty big money with the Yankees, which could make him a little cheaper, and he would be a pretty interesting bat against left-handed pitching. Unfortunately, he's going to be turning 33 years old early next season. And right now, the Yankees are not exactly giving him away, basically looking for one of the top prospects in our system or a pretty important major league player to bring him on board. I guess there is one option that doesn't fit that profile, though, which could be interesting. It's the minor league catcher Andrew Yu. Excellent defensive catcher, great personality, captain personality. He's been in Class A for us. A guy that we picked in the 16th round in 2025 has been one of the positive influences in that clubhouse trying to hold things together. Clearly not a true major league prospect, as a guy who's almost 26 years old, hasn't made it above A ball. So I wouldn't let you hold up bringing Berger on board, but I honestly don't know that I want to be spending $15 million a year on Berger for each of the next two seasons. So if we were going to make that type of trade with the Yankees in particular, we would be expecting them to retain a very significant portion of his contract, and I just don't know how willing they will be to do that. And unfortunately, if we just use you in the trade, we can only get the Yankees to retain 5% of his contract. And again, $14 million-ish a year for the next 2 years for Berger, even though I would agree that his overall batting profile, and when we consider what he has done in recent major league seasons, he is a better option right now than either Chris Bryant or Joe Adele, with the money that he's looking for and the money that we'd have to pay him. I don't think that's a direction that I'm quite ready to go at this point. So although I've made a short story long story short is that I think we've still got a lot of real interesting decisions to make over the next 3 months or so until the season gets underway. I guess it's less than 3 months at this point, on January 20th, with the preseason beginning in just 3 days and then spring training beginning exactly a month from today. So we'll find out how the rest of the offseason goes in our next episode. I guess one final thing before I do that, let's check in on what's happened in the player development lab over the last month, and looks like pretty bad news. We've only got one guy who's on track, catcher Drake Baldwin, with the quality of his contact. Everybody else is frustrated or struggling, so it's not inconceivable that we're going to go through this entire off-season period with 8 very important players to our organization in the player development lab, and perhaps only get 1 or 2 successful programs, which would certainly be a disappointment, particularly given that we used 6 of our 8 spots this year on young guys in their teens and early 20s who we think are going to be a big part of our future. Certainly would hope that some of those players turn things around over these next 4 or 5 weeks and do end up having some success in the development lab this offseason. And we'll find out whether or not that actually happens in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.